When I bought my house in Serenity Springs, the real estate agent called it a sanctuary in the suburbs. A quiet, upscale cul-de-sac, shielded by trees, kissed by lake breezes, and lined with manicured lawns. What sealed the deal for me wasn't just the privacy or the double garage, it was the pool. A sprawling, saltwater beauty edged with stonework, perfectly positioned in my backyard like a private resort. I called it my escape. Then I met her. Karen Delaney, HOA president. Blonde bob, manicured nails, clipboard always in hand. She introduced herself before my moving truck even pulled away from the curb. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she chirped, standing square in my driveway. "We're all about community here. I hope you're ready to get involved." What she meant, I learned, was compliance. She quoted bylaws like scripture. She handed out citations like candy. The woman once fined a neighbor for having an emotionally aggressive mailbox color. I figured if I kept my lawn neat and my mouth shut, she'd leave me alone. I figured wrong. The first warning came a month later. Karen let herself into my backyard, claiming she was checking for potential drainage hazards near the pool. I caught her taking photos. "This area might need to be made available for community activities," she said vaguely, not looking up from her clipboard. I laughed, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. From there, things escalated in whispers. Karen began dropping odd comments during HOA meetings about shared spaces and underutilized amenities. I knew exactly what she was angling for, but when I pushed back, the board, all her friends, of course, brushed me off. "Nothing's been decided yet, Tom," they'd say. "Let's not be adversarial." 2 weeks before the incident, I came home to the sound of voices, multiple. When I stepped into my backyard, I nearly choked. Karen was there. So was a wedding planner, a photographer, and 2 women I didn't recognize, all walking around my pool deck like it was a booked venue. Fabric swatches were laid across the lounge chairs. Someone was measuring the distance from the pool to the fence. A floral mock-up stood perched at the deep end, right beside the grill I'd installed myself. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded. Karen turned, feigning surprise. "Tom, great timing. We were just visualizing. My daughter's wedding is in 2 weeks, and the community event space by the lake is soaked from the recent rains. Your pool area is the perfect alternative." I blinked. "Alternative? This is my home, not a rental hall." "Oh, of course. But we voted last Thursday to approve temporary community access. It's all in the latest addendum, subsection 3B. You should have received the notice." "I didn't vote on anything," I said. "I didn't even hear about it." She gave me that smile, the kind that makes your skin itch. "It passed unanimously. You must have missed the email. But don't worry, we'll clean up afterward. You won't even know we were here." I felt something cold and immovable settle in my chest. "Karen, I don't consent to any of this. This is my property." "You might want to check your mailbox," she said softly. "It's already decided." I marched back inside, fuming, and found it an envelope from the HOA. Inside was an official-looking letter, complete with HOA letterhead and signatures from the board, stating that my backyard was being designated for temporary communal use due to event displacement, and that I was expected to facilitate access in the spirit of neighborly cooperation. I reread the line 3 times. "Your compliance is appreciated and expected." The next day, I tried everything, called the HOA legal hotline, voicemail, the city zoning board, helpless, and even a local mediator. Nothing. Every route was slow, tangled, or conveniently outside of jurisdiction. Karen wasn't just violating my boundaries, she was setting fire to them. And I realized something. She wasn't doing this out of desperation. She was doing it because she could. I stood at the window that evening, watching the sun cast golden ripples across the pool, and made a quiet promise. If Karen wanted to use my pool for fairy tale, I'd make sure it came with a plot twist she'd never forget. The morning after Karen's unsolicited takeover notice, I stood at the edge of my pool in silence. The water, calm and clear, shimmered beneath the rising sun. It had always been a symbol of peace for me, an escape after long shifts, a place to host friends or simply float under the stars. Now it felt invaded. I wasn't just angry. I was insulted. I walked the perimeter slowly, eyes scanning for vulnerabilities. Karen had crossed a line, and I was done playing passive neighbor. By noon, I'd made my first call to Ben Mendoza, a contractor friend with a knack for fast, discreet work. I need a fence, I told him. Something I can install myself. Temporary, but sturdy. He didn't ask questions. By 4 p.m., I was unpacking panels of 6-foot galvanized steel and rubber-footed posts. I worked until my hands ached, building a freestanding chain-link barrier within my property line, wrapping the pool area like a fortress. I added signs. Private property. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. It wasn't pretty, but it made a point. The next morning, I woke to shouting. Karen was in my backyard again, this time with a clipboard in one hand and a walkie-talkie in the other, flanked by 2 men in neon vests from the HOA maintenance crew. She looked up at me standing on the deck and gave me a theatrical wave. Tom, this isn't in compliance with community aesthetics. You didn't submit a structure permit. It's not a structure, I said coolly. It's a barrier. A necessary one, since you keep trespassing. She clicked her tongue. You're obstructing access to a designated community resource. That's a safety hazard. Gentlemen. I watched in disbelief as the crew began dismantling the fence, my fence, undoing hours of work with bolt cutters and brute force. You're on my property, I yelled. Karen smiled, triumphant. Temporarily allocated, remember? You agreed to the HOA terms when you bought here. I never agreed to this insanity. You don't have to like it, she said, turning to leave. You just have to comply. That night, I filed a police report for trespassing and vandalism. The officer sympathized, but shrugged. HOA disputes get muddy, he said. Unless they break something or threaten you, it's civil, not criminal. I felt like I was screaming underwater, drowning in bureaucracy, while Karen threw a party on my deck. But rage is a strange fuel. It doesn't always burn hot. Sometimes it simmers, silent and focused. I spent the next 2 days laying the groundwork, not just for defense, but for justice. I pulled up every HOA bylaw, every zoning map, every meeting minute from the last year. Karen had pushed through dozens of amendments quietly, bypassing protocol with ghost votes and manipulated language. The woman wasn't just arrogant, she was sloppy. I called my cousin Mara, a paralegal who owed me a favor, and had her review everything. She nearly choked laughing. This stuff's paper thin, she said. None of it would hold in court. She probably thinks no one will ever challenge her. She's right, I muttered. No one ever has. Then maybe it's time someone did. Still, I knew legal proceedings would take time, weeks, maybe months. And the wedding? It was scheduled for Saturday. 3 days away. I had to act sooner. I walked back to the pool that evening and stared at the utility panel beside the filter system. A small, boxy device blinked green, my smart chlorination system. I'd installed it last year to automate chemical balancing. It worked like a charm, with one important feature: remote control. A plan began forming. Karen wanted a fairy tale wedding. She wanted white chairs and floating candles, delicate flowers and harp music. But she'd forgotten one thing. This was still my pool. And unlike her precious bylaws, chemistry doesn't lie. I began recalibrating the chlorinator settings, timing its peak release to coincide with mid-afternoon, the same time her daughter would be saying I do. I wasn't out to hurt anyone. No violence. No destruction. Just correction. A subtle, pungent lesson in boundaries, backed by the sting of sodium hypochlorite. By the time Friday rolled around, the backyard looked unrecognizable. Karen had transformed it into a wedding venue. Silk bunting stretched from fence post to fence post. A white trellis had been installed near the diving board. Tables, chairs, floral arrangements, all perfectly staged. Guests had begun arriving for rehearsal. They walked across my patio like it belonged to them. But I wasn't angry anymore. I was calm, prepared, watching from behind mirrored sunglasses and sipping iced tea like a man waiting for a storm he'd seated himself. Because Saturday was coming. And so was the chlorine. Saturday arrived like a marching band, loud, polished, and utterly tone-deaf. The sound of rental vans beeping in reverse yanked me from bed at 7 a.m. outside. A small army of caterers, decorators, and harpists moved through my backyard like it was a town square. Someone was setting up a mini sound system beneath my pergola. A guy in a tuxedo tested a microphone with a booming 1-2-1-2. I stood at the sliding glass door in silence, sipping black coffee, letting the absurdity wash over me. They'd taken everything, space, dignity, consent, and twisted it into a Pinterest wedding fantasy. Karen fluttered about in a sequin shawl, giving orders and fawning over her daughter like she was queen of the HOA prom. Her husband, a quiet man I'd only seen twice, looked like he wanted to melt into the lawn. At precisely 12:30 p.m., guests began streaming through the side gate in pastel-colored dresses and expensive shoes. No one knocked. No one asked. They treated my home like a backdrop. I kept out of sight, watching from an upstairs window with my laptop open beside me. On the screen, the pool's smart chlorination dashboard. I'd calibrated it the night before to run a deep cleanse cycle starting at 1:45 p.m., coinciding perfectly with the vows. For safety, I'd double-checked the levels. Nothing toxic, just enough. Enough to sting the eyes. Enough to make people wonder why their champagne tasted like a public locker room. Karen had emailed me that morning, a smug little note thanking me for your eventual cooperation in the spirit of unity. Unity. She had no idea the storm was already brewing beneath the surface of that glassy blue water. At 1:30 p.m., harp music began to play. The wedding party took their positions near the diving board. Guests filled the rows of white chairs. The flower girl, a curly-haired sprite in a yellow dress, skipped down the aisle tossing petals. And then, as Karen stood beside her daughter, smiling like she'd orchestrated the royal wedding itself, it began. Click. I tapped the button. Within moments, the pool jets kicked on with a soft hiss, releasing a concentrated wave of chlorine into the water. It was invisible at first, just ripples on the surface. But then the smell started. Subtle. Then stronger. People began to shift in their seats. By 1:50 p.m., the officiant cleared his throat and began speaking, but he was interrupted almost immediately by a chorus of coughs. Is something burning? A woman whispered loudly. Someone gagged. The bride looked up from her bouquet, nose wrinkling. Is that the pool? A man near the front wiped his eyes. My contacts are stinging. By 1:53 p.m., chaos bloomed. One of the groomsmen stumbled backward, eyes red, fanning his face. Guests rose from their seats in confusion, muttering and looking around. Someone shouted for water, ironically, while surrounded by it. Karen pushed through the crowd, eyes scanning wildly. She looked at the pool, now giving off a strong chemical tang, and then at the control panel on the side. And then she saw me, standing calmly on the deck above, arms crossed, no smile, no anger, just stillness. She stormed up the patio stairs, nostrils flaring. What did you do? I held up my phone, screen still open to the chlorination settings. Scheduled maintenance. All within my rights as the owner. You ruined my daughter's wedding. No, I said flatly. You did, when you decided this was your property. Behind her, guests were evacuating like there'd been a gas leak. Napkins flew. Shoes were abandoned. The harpist was packing her strings like it was a fire drill. Karen sputtered, red-faced and shaking. You'll be hearing from the board. I already did, I replied. And so will they from my attorney. Every illegal vote, every abuse of power. It's all documented now. She froze. I'm filing a lawsuit Monday morning, I added. And while I'm at it, a motion to dissolve the current board. Enjoy your power trip while it lasts. Her jaw clenched. You can't do that. Oh, but I can, I said, stepping past her and heading inside. See, Karen, the difference between us is when I enforce boundaries, I do it legally. And thoroughly. As the chlorine-laced wind swept through the backyard, Guests scattered, and petals floated in the toxic breeze like confetti from a battle. Karen remained standing, eyes watering, mascara beginning to run. The queen of the cul-de-sac had just lost her crown. Monday morning dawned crisp and quiet, eerily so, given the chemical war zone my backyard had become just 2 days earlier. The only remnants of Karen's disastrous wedding were wilted petals clinging to the grass, a forgotten folding chair half submerged in the pool, and the acrid sting of chlorine still faint in the air. But inside my house, things were far from still. I was on a Zoom call with Mara, my cousin/legal sledgehammer, and we were finalizing the complaint package. Pages of documents were stacked neatly beside me. Emails, HOA meeting minutes, bylaws, photos, and video footage from my security cameras. Every detail was accounted for. "Your HOA president is toast," Mara said, smirking through the screen. "This is some of the most blatant abuse of power I've seen outside of a Netflix docuseries." "She's not the president anymore," I replied, calmly flipping through a copy of the HOA charter. "Or, at least, she won't be by the end of this week." I submitted the complaint to our county's civil court by noon. Then I sent formal letters to every household in the neighborhood, detailing Karen's misconduct, complete with screenshots and annotated timelines. I used the same envelope format the HOA used for their ridiculous violation notices. The response was immediate and overwhelming. By Tuesday, the neighborhood buzzed louder than a hive of hornets. People I barely knew showed up at my door with handshakes, cookies, and whispered gratitude. Turns out, I wasn't the only one Karen had steamrolled. She'd fined one family for planting non-regulation petunias. Another had their kids' bikes towed for being unsightly. A retired veteran across the street had been threatened with foreclosure over a flagpole 2 inches too tall. She hadn't just ruled the neighborhood. She'd terrorized it. The emergency board meeting I petitioned for was approved and scheduled for Thursday night in the community clubhouse. I arrived 10 minutes early, dressed clean-cut, documents in hand. The place was already packed. Every seat was filled. People lined the walls. Even the mayor's assistant showed up. Karen stood near the front with the rest of the board, noticeably quieter than usual, her once glittering composure now dulled with worry. Her daughter, the bride, was nowhere to be seen. I took the microphone. "Neighbors," I began, "I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I know many of you have experienced the same frustrations I have, being silenced, ignored, or bullied by the very people who claim to represent our interests." Heads nodded. Murmurs of agreement echoed across the room. I raised a folder high. "In this packet are documented violations committed by this HOA board, including illegal votes, misused funds, and actions taken without proper consent." I paused, letting the weight of it settle. "I've already filed a civil suit, and I've requested a full audit. But tonight, I'm asking for something simple. A vote to remove the current board." The silence that followed was electric. Then someone clapped. Another followed. Then the room erupted. A petition passed around. Pens scratched furiously. People who hadn't spoken up in years now shouted for transparency, for change. Karen tried to respond, but every word she spoke was swallowed by a wave of dissent. Her voice, once sharp and unchallenged, cracked under pressure. She looked smaller now, not physically, but in presence. The iron-fisted queen of the cul-de-sac had finally met her reckoning. By the end of the night, the vote passed with near-unanimous support. The board was dissolved. Karen was stripped of her authority. A temporary committee, led by me, was instated to oversee the restructuring. Justice didn't just knock. It kicked the damn door down. That night, I walked back home under the stars, exhaustion in my bones but peace in my chest. The pool water had cleared, the filter doing its job, washing away the remnants of Karen's reign. The next day, a moving truck appeared outside her home. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't have to. The silence from her house was answer enough. Weeks passed, and the neighborhood began to heal. The new board, elected fairly and transparently, instituted reasonable rules and focused on community, not control. Kids rode their bikes freely again. Flags flew without fear. And on summer nights, laughter echoed from my backyard once more. One evening, a neighbor asked if I'd ever considered running the HOA permanently. I smiled. No need, I said, lounging beside the pool. All I ever wanted was my space. My peace. And thanks to one wedding, one vial of chlorine, and a whole lot of stubborn will, I finally had it.